I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Sitting on my far right is my good friend and co-host, John Monroe Castle. Hey, John.
Hello, hello.
And sitting between us is our another good friend. It's our good friend. He's been with me for ages. It's been what? I actually looked this up, and I'll introduce him in a second. But it's almost 9 years to the day that we did our first show together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Sitting alongside me is Father Murphy, who is actually Reverend Dr. Richard Murphy, who is the pastor of St. Bede's Episcopal Church here in Santa Fe. And as you can tell from our little opening, him and I go back quite a ways. He's been with me on radio. Want me to tell the story?
You go ahead and tell the story. You remember it better than I do.
Because I remember how we met. There was a thing on domestic violence, and you were holding it at your church.
Yep, remember it.
And so I just started. I've been doing the radio for a short period of time, and I came to the church, introduced myself to you, and you didn't blow me off. And you said, "But call me and let's talk about it." But you couldn't do it now. And I called you, and we got together, and we wound up doing a show. And I think I mentioned it last week when we started talking. You were probably the most frequent guest I've had on my radio show.
I don't know how to say no.
Today's topic.
Today's topic.
How to say no to Phil.
And so it's only fitting that you become our first guest on the TV show. So today's prophetic topic is "Tell no man what things they had seen." And this phrase can be found in the Gospel according to St. Mark, the King James Version, chapter 9, verse 9. It reads as follows. "And as they came down from the mountain, he charged them that they should tell no man what things they had seen, till the Son of Man were risen from the dead." And we'll get into why that was chosen, and that was actually Father Murphy's choice. Why don't we start with just how did you become Father Murphy?
Well, it's a long story, which I'll try and make short. I think you and I have talked about it a number of times. And by the way, it's great to be here, and I didn't realize that it's been 9 years. I've been 12 years now in Santa Fe at St. Bede's, so time flies, as they say. I arrived in the Episcopal Church back in 1978-79 after growing up Irish Catholic in New Haven, Connecticut, and actually having spent 5 years in a Roman Catholic seminary studying for the Archdiocese of Hartford, Connecticut. And I left the seminary in 70 and wandered around and did some church shopping for a while, and actually wound up in a Baptist church for a number of years.
Hey.
And what can I tell you?
That's a great thing.
And my wife and I, Carol, were married there in 1974. And we moved to a town on the north shore of Boston, Hamilton, South Hamilton, Mass. And I wandered into an Episcopal church one Sunday morning, and it was literally one of those aha experiences. I had been looking for a church that combined, at that time, was what's called a very evangelical Episcopal church. It combined a wonderful preaching of the gospel and a wonderful celebration of the liturgy and the sacraments, and it drew me back in. And then in about 1982, I began these crazy thoughts about pursuing the ordination process, and for a while just kept my mouth shut. I actually kept it shut for a year until my wife, Carol, said, "You've got to go see the priest about it." And the funny thing was, he echoed what I had been told in the Catholic Church when I had a priest once say that he'd been waiting for a year for me to come around and tell him that I was leaving the Roman Catholic Seminary, and this particular priest in the Episcopal Church said, "I've been waiting a year for you to come around and tell me you wanted to be ordained." I was working as a probation officer in Peabody, Massachusetts. And I went off to seminary in 84 and was ordained a deacon in 89. This is my 20th anniversary this month. And was ordained a priest in 1990 and came to Santa Fe in 1997.
What?
That's the short route.
Short route. What was the switch from Roman Catholic to Episcopal? How'd that feel? I mean, did you...
You know, I'm asked that a number of times. Matter of fact, I even had somebody asking me at church yesterday who is on his own spiritual journey, what was it like? Because he's a former Roman Catholic himself. In the ordination process, just to quickly explain, in the Episcopal Church, you meet with, along the line, 2 psychiatrists. And both of them were concerned about that very question. And one, the final interview I had, the psychiatrist came out and admitted, he said, I'm puzzled that you don't show any stress or strain or any anxiety over having left the Roman Catholic Church and joining the Episcopal Church. And he said, why is that? And I said, simply, I haven't left the Catholic Church. I've just moved to another room in the house. And that's how I felt from the first time I walked into that church. I see the Episcopal Church and Anglicanism, as we define ourselves, as both Reformed and Catholic. And we've never left that Catholic strain in our history, and so I've never been uncomfortable with the move. A few of my Irish relatives were a little concerned about my move to the Church of England, but that was a whole other, that could be a whole other show, you know.
There might actually be another take to this, okay? You left the Roman Church, but it was your Baptist interlude.
That's it.
That gave you clarity in the wilderness.
Opened my eyes.
And opened your eyes and your heart to the Spirit so that you were ready.
I did.
Right?
I heard the voice saying, get out. Quick.
Go and tell no one.
Really? You know, I mean, the reason I asked that question is I think a lot of the people, I know at least from my radio show, I'm assuming it's going to be the same for the TV show, that a lot of people feel like they're stuck in the religion. If they don't practice what their parents practice, they practice nothing. Right. And, they have an easier time with that than, like you said, go shopping. I think it's important that, we find our own sense of spirit wherever we find it. And if what our parents did didn't work for us, then it's time to look for something else.
And I generally tell folks when they come in and tell me that they've been on a search themselves, when you walk into that faith community and feel that at-homeness, that aha experience, I said, that's God's leading. And that can be a Buddhist temple, can be a Jewish temple, can be a Christian church. So I think that to me, that's where God's grace and Spirit are working when they're urging us on, but not to feel trapped. That's the worst thing.
Well, let me ask you another question. I mean, because you bring up an interesting topic. How much of it is the real religion? How much of it is the priest, the pastor, the rabbi who is in front every day? I mean, there's a couple of Episcopal or 3 Episcopal churches in town, and I don't want to categorize them, but yours is quite different than the others. So is it really, are they finding a path, or are they finding somebody who they can relate to?
I think in Santa Fe, one of the advantages, for lack of a better word or a different word, in coming to the Episcopal Church here is that there are differences. The differences are clear enough that folks walking into St. Bede's or Holy Faith or Holy Family Mission out on Route 14 can sense that difference and begin to and find that, what I call that at-homeness. Holy Faith downtown tends to be more traditional, tends to be more conservative. St. Bede's tends to be more progressive, more liberal, and Holy Family on Route 14 kind of in the middle, is sort of a middle-of-the-road centrist kind of place. So the distinctions are pretty clear when they come in. Also, the style of liturgy has an awful lot to do with it in the Episcopal Church. More formal, again, downtown, very what we call an Anglo-Catholic high church. Somewhat high at St. Bede's, but not quite as much. And there's a certain informality there that you may not find at Holy Faith. There's also that informality and not so highness at Holy Family as well.
Can I respond to that too?
Go for it.
The discerning thing, is it the tradition that beckons, that brings us, calls us home, makes us feel at home? Is it the person representing that tradition, either the religious leadership or some relationship with a person in those faith communities that makes it feel at home. I happen to think that it's really a combination
Yeah, I think, yeah.
of all. And when the combination is right, just like with a lock, it opens. So you may have a combination of a place that feels right, a tradition that feels inviting, a person that matches that tradition and offers that personal relationship. And when it comes together, it is a beautiful thing. And I like your use of aha, I'm home.
Yeah.
This is
It's got to be a
the
natural
place.
feeling.
It does, and that's that also says to me that the shopping, you use the word kind of shopping around, is very valid and valuable, because we expose ourselves to different contexts and situations so that we can feel like we've come as part of our journey, instead of by happenstance or accident, because I don't think there is happenstance or accident. I think it's all part of the leading of spirit.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, like within the Jewish tradition, they have Orthodox, Conservative, Reform. So they make clear distinctions as to how they practice their particular brand of Judaism. My awareness is that, like Episcopal Church doesn't, for instance. So I find it interesting that they could have so much personality differences. The congregation sets the personality. They hire, whenever the time is right, they hire a pastor who reflects that personality, who may add to it. And it builds its own kind of path and its own momentum. But it's all within the same tradition, and I just find that kind of interesting.
We put a heavy emphasis on scripture tradition and the use of reason, rather than less on the doctrinal side and more on the reasoning side, where people have in an Episcopal faith community have a number of choices.
Can you give us a brief enlightenment of the Episcopal Anglican history and
the Anglican? I'll do it in 5 minutes. Henry VIII killed his wives and cut his losses with Rome and established the Church of England in the 16th century. That's the short version. The long version is that it did start with Henry VIII and his divorce with Catherine of Aragon when the Pope wouldn't allow it, and he and the Pope finally separated, and this goes back into the mid-16th century, and it was right around the time of the Protestant Reformation in Germany, and that had a great influence on what became the Church of England. And the word Anglican didn't even come into use, I don't think, until at least the 18th, perhaps the 17th century, but I'm almost positive it wasn't until the 18th century. And one of the amazing things about the Episcopal Church, and the Anglican Communion, the worldwide Anglican Communion that appealed to me in the beginning, is one of our central tenets is the concept of the via media, and that we try and be that place where people can come together and in a reconciling way, in a way that we hope tensions and opposites are recognized. And from England, it simply grew throughout the world, thanks to the English trading companies. That it was always a requirement of the East India Company and other trading companies to bring along priests. And as a matter of fact, when they would ship out, the priest on the particular boat would be graded by the captain as to, one, the quality of his services, and two, how often he celebrated services on board the ship while they were going across the ocean.
And
if he
landed
landed someplace and the report was bad, he was out of work. Yeah, so we spread that way, and we're not the typical missionary kind of church in that extent. So anyway, here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's bring it into the personal, so to speak. From knowing you for all these years, one of the things you are always very passionate about and very involved with is peace and reconciliation. Right. And I'm going to extend that to, you find that in your interpretation of the church's statements and mission, I would say.
Yeah, I would say my own personal theology on reconciliation is linked up with my understanding of the cross. This is why, excuse me, one of the interests we have here is the Gospel of Mark, which really was another one of these sparks in my lives, where when the cross and the passion, to me, have always been a process of reconciliation, of Jesus drawing the world to himself. My interest in reconciliation, I've scratched my head on that subject over the years, because it's been a part of my life for at least most of my ministry. And again, it was one of those aha experiences. Several years ago in my previous church in Quincy, Massachusetts, nearby was the Episcopal Divinity School, and I was doing some continuing ed work there, and just simply saw on the bulletin board one day a course offering coming up in the summer of studying conflict, or studying a theology of reconciliation in the midst of conflict and the troubles in Northern Ireland. And having grown up in an Irish family, and being imbued with Irish nationalism. And also, when I saw the price on the board, I said, this is a cheap trip to Ireland, Why don't I sign up for it? So I did, and it turned out to be intentionally a program in reconciliation. We wound up even meeting with a lot of the political and church leaders and having some input into the present peace process. And again, it was like walking into the Episcopal Church. I found that being in a ministry of reconciliation, the light went on. It was something that I really enjoyed. And that's because I grew up in a home where my mother, God rest her soul, taught my sister and myself how to be able to listen to both sides and to be a reconciling people. I mean, I really owe it to those roots.
So can you elaborate somewhat on the peace process that you got involved with in Northern Ireland?
It was, excuse me, for me it was one of those almost, it sounds grandiose, but it was sort of a life-changing experience. I was part of a delegation of about, there were 20 of us that were ranged from professional conflict resolution specialists to seminarians, and then myself, the simple parish priest. And we were, the focus of the program at the time, to try and sum it up, was to just simply meet with political and religious leaders in the Northern Ireland peace process. It was 1996. The Good Friday Agreement was 2 years away. There was still a lot of turmoil. There had been an IRA ceasefire as of '94, so the troubles had sort of quieted down a bit. And we began the program with a series of meetings. But the first day we were there, this is one of the things I've thought about afterwards. We're driving literally from the airport out to this retreat center where we're going to be staying. And a Jesuit priest by the name of Father Ray Helmick from Boston College, who had been in the reconciliation process there for a lot of years, was in the car with us. And he turned to me. I had just met him at the airport for the first time when we arrived. He'd already been there. He said, Dick, I want to let you know that in 4 days you will be leading a delegation into the Mays prison to meet with the IRA leadership, and I want you to chair the conversation. And I said, I can do that, sure. And it was a very long story. 8 of us wound up going that day to the Mays, which is also known as the Long Kesh prison. And 4 went in to meet with the Protestant paramilitaries, and my group went in to meet with the IRA. It was the actual leadership, what they called the overseeing commander, a fellow by the name of Padraic Wilson, and his command staff. And the place was run like a military prison camp. It's not your typical prison that you would find like the county jail or the state prison. It's a prisoner of war camp. My probation experience helped me because it had been arranged by the probation service that had been in there, and we talked shop for a while before we went in, but they really briefed me. And we the amazing part of the conversation was, as I told my wife, much to her dismay afterwards, when I was with these people, I said I felt right at home. I felt like I was back in South Boston on D Street, hanging out with the guys. These are the folks I'd grown up with all my life, and so I felt I was really comfortable. So we began with the usual pleasantries and introductions and talking about backgrounds. And I just at one point brought up the issue of decommissioning the weapons, which had been the stalling point in the negotiations at that point at Stormont. And I didn't do it to make any waves or anything, just simply asked this leadership group, what would it take to give, or did they, one, want to give up weapons and lay the weapons down? As Jerry Adams would say, did they want to take the gun out of Irish politics? And two, what would be the method by which they would do it? And the conversation just took a turn, and we went down that street for most of the conversation. And then we got back into talking about the relationship of their personal Catholic faith and their revolutionary stance and their armed struggle stance and how they reconciled it. And we talked about that. The conversation went on for about 2 or 3 hours. Walking back across what was called No Man's Land afterwards, Brian, the head probation officer, and I, who had become good friends, we're walking towards the dining hall to meet with the guard staff to just have lunch with them. And Brian just simply turned to me in the middle of no man's land and said, "You just made history in there." And I stopped in my tracks and I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "No one, until you walked in there, has raised the issue of disarmament with that group." And he said, "We can't do it because we're employees of the British government and we're automatically seen as the enemy in there." He said, I didn't even have my collar on. I just walked in with a jacket and tie because they had asked me not to show my Anglicanism, which is the Protestant side of the struggle over there. And he said, "That's the first time that issue has been raised. And we want to thank you for that and putting the conversation on the table."
Terrific.
And there was a lot of consequences that flew from that. Thanks. It was interesting.
So let's tie this back in again, because what this show is about is spirituality. What part of scriptures motivated you to take this stance, to present this?
You know, that day, it was funny. I wasn't thinking of, and in situations afterwards, I certainly get thinking on a spiritual or theological focus. But that particular day, I have to be honest, it was simply, I wanted to talk peace with these people. I wanted to see that, is it possible to end not only the troubles since the late 60s, but also what began 800 years ago? Is it possible to put the guns down? I mean, I have to confess that being raised in an Irish Catholic family with an Irish immigrant mother, part of her milk was made up of the Democratic Party, God, and Irish nationalism. So you can pick out the order for that, And it just had to stop. And Jesus, to me, has always been a prophet of peace. He came into the world as God incarnate to, I strongly believe, reconcile the faith community at that point, the Jewish community at that point, and try and create, as there's a wonderful book, James Douglas's Coming of the Nonviolent God, in which he talks about Jesus coming to form communities of nonviolent resistance against the Roman occupier and the temple authorities, the religious authorities, and like his cousin John the Baptist, bring people back to the roots of Sinai, to the roots of the covenant. And so I always think that as a healer, as a teacher, and all that, he's also came in as a radical peacemaker. The Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount encapsulates so much of his philosophy.
It certainly goes back to previous prophetic tradition, I believe, with Isaiah.
Yep.
To turn plowshares into, to turn weapons into farming implements, something peaceful and useful. Yeah.
And this was not the only venture, so to speak, into peace and reconciliation. You were involved, was it in Bosnia?
I got the bug that summer in Northern Ireland. So the next year I was taking another course at the Episcopal Divinity School, and as my seminary dean told me over 25 years ago, he said, "You're the only one that reads the bulletin board." and that got me even then in Nicaragua, for goodness sakes. But I read the bulletin board once again and saw that the course the following year was going to be a similar course in studying the theology of reconciliation in Bosnia. The war was 97, and I just arrived out here. This was my introduction. St. Bede's didn't know what to make of me. All of a sudden, he's here a few months, and some guy came in one day scratching and said, "Why are you going, of all places, to Bosnia?" And so we did the same thing over there for about 2, almost 3 weeks of meeting with, that time was mostly with church groups, with church leadership, some political leaders, and some educational leaders. The thing is about both Bosnia or the Balkans, because we traveled from Belgrade all the way up to Croatia and down then into Turkey and Greece. The thing that I've always managed to do over there, because of my open nature, I guess it is I've made a lot of friends in these areas. So I've always gone back. And I've been back to Croatia once with a close friend who's a Presbyterian pastor over there, and is somewhat active in reconciliation work. And I've done the same thing in Northern Ireland. So I found in the Balkans that they were much. This was one of the aha moments, that most of the Orthodox church leaders over there were very resistant to ecumenical dialogue, and they were also resistant to, there's more of a nationalist strain that prevented some reconciliation. We later met a happenstance with we were about to meet with an Orthodox priest who was very much into reconciliation in Kosovo, but because of security reasons we couldn't go in there. And then in Istanbul, I met with 3 mullahs who run a TV station, who had as the purpose of the TV station was to promote reconciliation. At that time, they were working strongly within both Orthodox and Muslim communities in Kosovo. So, there's a variety of, I saw a wide variety of Muslim activism over there.
So if there was to be a Department of Peace and Reconciliation created in the government and you were put in charge, what would you do? What would be your first?
Well, give himself a raise, right?
Exactly. Thank you very much. Check the dental policy. After I got the magic wand and figured, well, that wouldn't work, one of the things that is real central to me that I'd want to see worked out would be the creation in a lot of areas of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Not so much cloned from the South African experience, but at least as a model for that. The other thing is I probably you wouldn't find me in a government institution, in the Peace and Reconciliation Department, because I've really, in my travels, and God bless government workers, I'm not knocking them at all, and State Department folks, they do great jobs. But I've always been highly impressed and energized by the work of non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, that are always on the ground in the trenches. I've met some pretty amazing workers, and for the most part, they have been young, fresh out of graduate school, filled with hope and idealism. And in some instances, I've met with military folks who have just had enough of the brutal, violent side and are looking for some alternatives. But I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process is one model that could be copied.
So the first thing you do is resign from the governmental position.
Real quick.
And bolster up the NGO, the non-governmental organizations.
I mean, that's where my heart is. And I'm so much more comfortable. So.
I'm going to take a quick break here. We've got a couple of PSAs. Then we're going to go back and start talking about the Gospel of St. Mark and why that was our topic. So let's see. We got 2 of them here. First one is growing in the light through tough times is the subject of a new study circle starting Thursday, June 18th, 6:30 p.m. at Southside Quaker House. They'll read and discuss what financial experts and spirit-led teachers have to say about economic life, and they'll share their own hard-won insights. Free and open to the public. For more information, please call South Santa Fe Quaker Worship Group at 471-2288. The location is Quaker House, the 1730 Camino Carlos Rey, number 209, which is here in Santa Fe. And this is a rust red building at the short end of Camino Carlos Rey, northwest of Cerrillos Road, right past Performance Audios. So 471-2288 is the number. And also, second announcement, Dr. Larry Dosey, the well-known Santa Fe physician and author, will be speaking at the Center for Spiritual Living on Thursday, June 25th. He will be speaking about his new book, The Power of Premonitions. There is an admission charge for the lecture. For information, call 983-5022, and the Spiritual Living Center is located at 505 Camino de las Marquez. So that's Dr. Larry Dosey, 983-5022. Okay, so, Father, why did you choose, of all topics, the Gospel of St. Mark, and that particular statement out of the Gospel?
Several reasons. The one big reason that really has gotten me focused on the Gospel of Mark has only happened within the past few years. I was always, not that I lessen its importance, but it never was a big gospel with me, so to speak. Matthew and Luke and John always motivated me and still do. But I go most summers over to Oxford University to the Oxford Summer Program in Theology at Christ Church. And several years ago, I took a course in the Gospel of Mark by a remarkable Anglican priest by the name of John Fenton, who has since passed on. And he was a New Testament scholar of the highest mark, especially in England and Europe. It wasn't too well known over here. And he had a passion for Mark's gospel and introduced the Gospel of Mark in such a way that you caught on to that. You got caught up in his electricity and his energy. And he opened up Mark, and all of a sudden, I sort of, and I want to qualify this, I sort of found a home in Mark that I hadn't found before. And the reason I qualify it is because one of the strong elements in that gospel is Mark's, as one commentator once said, his obtuseness towards the disciples. And Mark really calls for a renunciation in our material lives to a large extent in order to enter into a deeper spiritual life, a life of discipleship. And the other thing that really hooked me was, quite frankly, was the fact that the gospel ends in a mystery. We're left hanging. The broad consensus among scholars is that the Gospel of Mark ends at verse 8, chapter 16, where the women are left in the garden after the resurrection, and they can't go and tell anybody. They've been told by Jesus to go and announce the good news of the resurrection, and they stay there in fear and trembling, and we're left hanging. And Professor Fenton would leave us hanging on that to try and figure it out. And there was those reasons. And then that one theme that just catches you whenever you read Mark was whenever Jesus would heal somebody or perform a miracle. Now, don't tell anybody. Mm-hmm. I restored your sight. You can walk again. You don't have any marks. The devil doesn't. Don't tell a soul. And it just seemed to be incongruous. So I said, this is someplace I have to... I've got to study. Also, it's a short gospel, so it's easy for my short attention span. And so that's an easy one. Mm-hmm. And that it really is, it's a synopsis. Mark is, as one scholar has said, and he's right, that it's a preface to the Passion and Resurrection. The last chapters from 11 through 16, the last 5 chapters of the Gospel of Mark, constitute the last week of the life of Jesus. And everything is leading up to that last week in Mark's gospel. There's no infancy narrative. We don't know anything about the birth in Mark. And the other thing is that Mark is the first gospel. And even though in the canon of Scripture he's, because of history, is relegated to the second position, and then it was not until the 4th century that people started taking a look at him. And he actually is the one of perhaps 2 sources for Matthew and Luke. So he started the ball rolling. Also, he wrote at a time of conflict about the Roman wars, and depending on your point of view, before, after, or during, but nevertheless, he's caught up in a war, so he's very contemporary.
I was thinking about the so-called messianic secret. Go and tell no one. Don't let anybody know who I am, what's going on. Hush. And one of the things that comes to mind is that being a Davidic ruler, if the Messiah who was to come was to be from the house of David. And Davidic rulers, in principle, did not claim their rulership until a certain clarifying moment. And for Jesus, that clarifying moment was going to be his death and resurrection. It was not going to be the miracles. It was not going to be the healings. It was going to be this time when he proclaimed the new, the new reign of God, the new movement of God. And therefore, he didn't want anybody to say anything until that proclamation could be made.
He's really saying to his audience, you're not going to get it, you're not going to understand it until I've risen from the dead. And, all along, even the apostles are scratching their head. They're not hearing that, well, can I have a right place in the kingdom and all this? But Jesus is saying, wait, be patient. This is going to make sense to you. That's right on.
Yeah. And it's not making sense to the disciples
Right.
all through the gospel.
Right.
And one commentator I read said that that's actually part of Mark's sense of humor, because the people closest to him keep not getting
Right.
it. But that's all part of the process. It's a process of coming into and then slowly being revealed just what they are with, who they are with.
Yeah, and Mark writes his gospel in such a way that we in the 21st century, and he probably did it this way in his own time in the first century, he's writing it not to be read, but to be heard or to be imagined as we would a theater piece, so we know what's coming. And we want to jump into the story and say, hey, But it's a story that seeps deep within us, and that we experience it more than we just read the written word.
I'm not much of a biblical scholar. So I had two impressions when I read this, and maybe they were wrong, but I thought Mark, more than any of the other Gospels, really emphasized Jesus' healings, really focused in on that aspect of Jesus' ministry. Is that an accurate assessment?
Now you're sending me home to study again.
Well, I would say the fervor and passion, as in passionate, of Mark is about action.
Yeah.
Go and do. This is what's happening. This is what's being done, and the healings are very much evidence of the reign of God that is among us. I mean, the gospel begins with this is the good news, folks. Listen to it.
That's right. Yeah.
And John the Baptist says, "Time's up. Change your life." And so get busy. God's movement is juicing us up, and it is taking us somewhere. And our job is to go and to follow. And all the healings and the miracles are evidence of an active presence of God in the drama of people's lives. So I would say, yeah, you are picking up on something that Mark definitely wanted to make known.
Mark's the only evangelist that uses the term good news right in the beginning of this is the good news. And those healings, as John said, it's a sign that the kingdom has come. These folks have been healed. This is good news.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting, and you want to have a lot of energy with that.
And it also is the context of that, both for Mark's audience and for Jesus' audience that Mark is recording, is you're going into the heat of it. This is not going to be an easy life for you.
That's
When you grab the gospel and the gospel grabs you, it is good news. And it is good news that will be with you in tribulation, fire, death, trauma, all kinds of things. So Mark was not at all escapist. He very much said, this is a tough world we live in, folks, and it's going to get tougher. So the good news is God's with you.
Is this
You hit the nail on
also...
the head. You've just heard the whole Gospel of Mark. Thank you.
According
Yeah.
to John.
Mark.
Seconded, John Mark.
Could have been John Mark.
Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
there you go.
Yeah, seconded by Richard. I don't know that gospel, though.
It's not yet to be written.
In Irish brogue.
They're an Irish bro. Going to have to get past the censors.
Is this the only gospel where Jesus actually predicts his death and resurrection?
Oh no, he's saying it in the other Gospels as well. People aren't hearing it, But Matthew and Luke, he even has the Transfiguration, in which tradition tells us Moses and Elijah are talking to him about the final days. But Jesus, because it's the only gospel in the sense that it's the first gospel where that is being written, and Matthew and Luke, not John so much, but Matthew and Luke are taking that from Mark's gospel and putting it into their gospel. So in a sense, you could say, yeah, that's right. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's, I can't remember how many verses, but there are very few verses that are not from Mark, that are not used in the other gospels.
Okay.
So Mark is a foundational text. And part of that foundational text is Jesus' awareness of and his sharing his awareness of his real purpose. And that is to die. And that is to rise. And so it's not the only gospel. I think it perhaps is the most straightforward. Jesus is telling his disciples, I'm going to die. I have to die in order for this ongoing breaking in of the kingdom of heaven to happen. And they're like, what do you mean you have to die?
See, they were waiting for Jesus to come along. They thought the Messiah that would come would liberate them, would be the military liberator.
Right.
And Jesus is always saying, it's up to you.
The kingdom of God is within.
Right.
I'm not going to be here. You're going to have to pick up after I leave you.
In fact, the story before the chapter 9 text that you read is the Transfiguration in Mark. And Jesus is witnessed by Peter and, Simon? No.
Peter, James, and John.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good. If we do
that's a
this
freebie.
together, maybe.
That's a freebie.
Okay, that's a freebie. Thank you. As glowing, as being transfigured, beaming, as he discusses something with Elijah and Moses, who have both appeared on the mountain with Jesus. And so them coming to Jesus and being part of this transfiguration is a way of saying, you are the ultimate, the outcome, the fulfillment of our prophecy. Moses was a liberator. Okay? Elijah was another very powerful prophet. And both Moses and Elijah were expected to somehow translate into first century Judaism. Elijah was coming back because he never really died. In Scripture, he's taken away in a chariot. So they're waiting for him to come back. And in fact, in the Seder meal, there's often, I think always, maybe a seat that's left.
Seat for Elijah.
Yes, a seat that with a setting that's left empty in case Elijah shows up. And so they were waiting, as you said, they were waiting for this leader to come and say, we are going to change everything in this world. And Jesus' understanding of himself and the relationship of this world to God was much different than what they were expecting.
So the thrust of this show, from what we stated last week, is to give people tools for changing their life. What would you want people to take away from Mark, from this discussion of Mark? What tools are we hearing today?
I think one thing we need to hear is the call to discipleship, which is so prominent in his gospel. And then something that I consider, and this is my own personal theological insight, is something that is very humanly simple. And that is to find God, find the holy and the sacred, find Jesus, oftentimes in the unexpected, in each other, rather than looking for peak experiences. For instance, one of the elements of the gospel is that it's good to be read with a sense of irony. For instance, an example of that would be at the cross, when the Roman centurion looks up at Jesus on the cross and says, in the gospel, said, so this is the Son of God. In Mark, it's probably correct to read it, so this is the Son of God. You know, it's not a great conversion experience, and it's a sense of somebody who's missing what's the obvious right in front of me. Yes, this is God. This is God's Son right here. So I think the lesson you take away from something like that is don't look for the extraordinary. Find Jesus in the ordinary. and be a disciple, and be a disciple of peace.
It's very comforting for me as I try to think of myself as a growing disciple in Jesus' way, to understand that we don't get it.
Yeah.
We don't get it a lot, and Jesus never did say, he would get frustrated, you guys, but he never.
Here we go again.
He never tossed them out and saying, you're not good enough. In fact, that's one of the things, is we are good enough. We are chosen by God to become disciples of love and of reconciliation and of peace. And hearing your story of going into the maze in Northern Ireland is a perfect example of that. It's not so much about making sure that the right people are having the right global stage to bring peace. No, it's going in and talking to the people about peace. It's about being peaceful with them. And that's one of the tools. You said, don't wait for the extraordinary. Look at the ordinary. And the ordinary is this: 3 guys here. 3 guys who love each other, who care about each other, who support each other in our lives. I mean, that's both very ordinary.
That's the person of the holy.
And it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
As we explore that.
There are a couple of statements that are in this gospel which, then get carried into others, but one of them we use for, I believe it's our promo, those who have ears, let them hear. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like what you were just talking about, a little bit about, just, aren't you guys listening to me?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I think to me, that's just so important. I mean, I think there is a message that we're still not hearing.
Mm-hmm. And that's not so much a condemnation as it is an invitation.
Right.
An ongoing invitation. Keep listening. As you have ears, you will hear. Because you have ears, you will hear. And, that, of course, is not so much about actual hearing, which I'm glad, since I'm technically deaf. I'd be left out, But it's really about being aware. Let those who are aware of the inbreaking of God within us, moving out to do the good news, to go into prisons, to go into neighborhoods, to go everywhere into the world. That's a tool.
So let's put this in maybe a different context. Are we talking about listening to the inner voice of spirit as opposed to listening to the teachings of somebody? Or are we talking about both?
I think we're talking about both.
Yeah.
We're going to hear God. We're going to hear Jesus and the Spirit. We're going to hear the holy and the sacred in so many ways. Like I said, the Gospel of Mark became alive to me in a classroom in Oxford. After years and years of studying Scripture and being in seminaries and whatnot, I had never heard it in the way I heard it, and all of a sudden it's taken me on a new path. It's walking into the Maze prison and just simply asking these prisoners, what's it going to take to lay down your guns? And then all of a sudden getting a response back rather than one of anger and hostility, but one of, well, let's talk about that. This is our position on it, and please carry our message out. So you're going to hear God wherever. I mean, as a parish priest, you see moments like that every day.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that idea of what is it going to take to lay the guns down was divine talking through you? I mean, did you go in there with that thought? Did it just come to you and say,
I went in there with the
table?
idea that when I've been asked to lead that conversation, I'd gone in there with the idea that we weren't going to talk about the lilies of the field, and that we weren't going to talk about the quality of food inside the Maze prison, that we needed to talk about some pretty substantial stuff. And quite frankly, which I've never said before, to go in there that day, I said, I've got to make it something, because selfishly, it cost me a little something. I gave up a meeting with Jerry Adams that day, which would have been the one and only opportunity to sit down with him, whereas the rest of our group went off. And there was something inside of me, that now that I've said that, that said, no, I belong there. I got to go into that situation. And I wrestled with it for a while.
Yep, remember, inspiration, inspirare in the Latin.
Yes, yeah.
In-breathing of God. And, you were paying attention so that the
Something
flow
spoke, yeah.
could go in and activate
Right.
inside of you, your conscience, your reason, your willingness to serve, your obedience to the law of love. All of that was activated so that you could participate.
Yeah, it was a sense I needed to be there. I needed to go. And I didn't have a clue. Being asked to lead. You're going to lead this conversation. Sounds very impressive. I was scared out of my mind.
I can imagine.
But you know what? I've got to say this: the minute this group of paramilitary IRA leaders, this was the general staff, walked in. You know what the first question was from the OC himself?
Where's the donuts?
No, well, close. He said, coffee or tea? And we put in our orders for coffee, and they went back to the kitchen and brought us back to coffee and tea. And I said, oh, this is home. I'm sitting back here. So
Hospitality.
it was, it was. And then we shared around sort of on the table, but in a circle. It was kind of nice. So. Anyway, that was it.
Yeah, I know, Phil, you are very capable at recognizing spirit within, the divinity within, in other people as well as yourself. And that, I think, is partly behind your question there, is when we go into these opportunities with the ears to hear, is this starting to grow and bust out of us like spirit saying, another opportunity to go out into the world.
I want to tell a quick story, then we're going to probably have to get into our end of show, at the real end of show this time.
We did the end of show 3 times last time.
I've got to see this tape.
I'll get it to you,
All right.
I promise. There is there's a wonderful book out called At the Feet of the Master. It was written by Jiddu Krishnamurti back when he was 16 years old. It was the first book he wrote, and it's under the name of Alcyon, AlYcion was his original name. And he talks about what he learned from his master up until that point. And there was one section that I read where he says, you better listen closely to the master. He never repeats anything twice. And I was like, the first time I read that, it was like, that's awfully harsh. Nobody could have that kind of perfect attention. And I read it a few times and stood with that kind of interpretation, and then I found myself working with adolescents in a shelter and a treatment center, and would tell them things, and they'd ask me, what did you just say? And I was like, I don't know. Or they'd ask me, why did you choose that example? And I was like, I don't know. And this was example obviously would have some kind of special meaning to them. And what I came to understand from that interpretation was God was talking through me.
Yeah.
And it was not about my pre-planned speech or my pre-planned treatment plan or any of that stuff. It was just letting the Spirit talk through me. And when they asked me, I had no recollection because it wasn't something I was generating. And that's why I asked the question about how you felt about that time when you just said, what will it take to put the guns down? To me, that sounds like such a simple and spontaneous thing that it sounded just so divinely inspired. That was the nature of the question.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we've gone into our closing, and we'll give time left. We'll give you a chance to let people know how to get a hold of you and show up. But what we do here is take a few minutes at the end, and John will give us his summary on it, because he's the word man and I'm the music
the
man.
listener.
Yeah. So take it away, sir.
The opportunity here is really to remind all of you out there that your chance is now. Your story has to be told. In the Gospel of Mark, the good news pops into the first sentence. Don't wait for the big arrangement, the big staging, the primo opportunity. Seize it now. Go now. Go into the places like Father Murphy went, partly because he had something to learn, but mostly because he had something to engage, and that is the love of God in immediate situations, usually difficult situations. Pay attention, let those who have ears hear, to that indwelling spirit that says to us, listen, act, and know that I am with you forever. Let's do this together. And that's what this show is about. That's what my good friend Dick Murphy is about. My good friend Phil is about. That's what I'm about. We got to go to these places because they're all over the place. God loves this world and sends us into it repeatedly. Go for it.
Thank you. And a couple of announcements quickly. I am co-facilitating a spiritual study group that meets every Monday night at 6 o'clock at the Vitamin Cottage Natural Grocers Event Center. It's when you're facing it, it's at 4250 Cerrillos Road. It's when you're facing the entrance. There's a little door on the right-hand side. You go through there, or you can get in through the store itself. We'll be meeting, like I said, every Monday night from 6 to roughly 7:15. It's free. Donations will be accepted. We're going to start with a meditation. We're going to do some topic. We're going to read and discuss, and we're going to end with a healing circle. Everybody is invited. The other thing I want to let you all know is at the end of this show, there'll be rolling credits. There'll be contact information for both John and I. We're both counselors. We approach things slightly differently, but we're both heavily invested in the concept that spirituality heals. And if you don't have a spiritual component, we're going to have a hard time healing. So if you need questions or comments, want to talk to us, set up an appointment, you can get that information there. Also, we welcome any questions you want to present to us. We'll read them on the air. Let us know if you want to maintain any level of anonymity. We'll be happy to discuss anything. We'll set aside time from any show that we're doing in order to do that. So if you got any questions or comments, or if you want something we could forward it on to Father Murphy. But you know what? Let's let you tell them how to reach him.
That's real easy. St. Bede's Episcopal Church is on the corner of St. Francis and San Mateo. We have services at 8 and 10 on Sundays, and we have a wonderful service of Healing and Holy Eucharist on Wednesdays at 12:15. And I also want to plug, which is a growing ministry now with the Hispanic community. Father Juan Oliver has joined our staff as an assisting priest, and there is a Mass in Spanish every Sunday night at 7 o'clock at St. Bede's. Our number is 982-1133, and you can reach me through there anytime.
Website or email?
Website is still a work in progress. Email is rwkmurphy@comcast.net.
Thank you.
RWK.
K comes from, quick story, growing up in the Catholic Church, when you're confirmed, you're given a confirmation name. And apparently my mother and father, both, God rest their souls, disagreed over my name. My father said, he's going to be named after me if it's a boy. My mother said, he's going to be named Kevin. And my father won, so for confirmation I chose Kevin. So whenever I go to get an email address, if I don't put the K in there, they say this address has already been used. So, K has come through heaven.
Very good.
So Kevin's a great Irish saint. So.
Good. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
It's
Phil.
been absolutely delightful. I could just sit and listen forever.
Well, it's been great.
And
we'll have you back.
We'll have you back. Yeah.
I look forward to it. This was wonderful.
Good.
This was wonderful.
Next show, we will have Phil and John again, and we will have a chair available for Elijah in case Elijah decides to show up.
Give me a call if he does.
Okay, I'm sure there will be many interested parties if that happens. Again, we will be addressing questions, concerns, and comments that you send to us as well. Thank you very much.
And we'll also finish up what we didn't finish up with our first show, because there was a lot of things we had on that list we wanted to touch base with. And I think that'll
Yeah.
continue. We touched on some of it, and we'll get a little bit more in depth into some of it.
Yeah, your phrase during the show was kick up a lot of dirt. We kicked up a lot of dirt.
Yes.
So now we're going to go see if we can either kick up more dirt,
You
make
gotta
it
sweep
totally
it. Now you
dirty,
gotta-
or sweep it around a little bit.
Okay. And to kind of close this out, do you have a parting thought, Father?
I would just want to add to what John said about being disciples of change and reconciliation, to never lose hope. I think the other part of Scripture that always has captured my heart is when Paul says we're prisoners of hope. And look at each day with a sense of hope and expectation. Do not get caught up in the cynicism and the anger and the pickiness of the day-to-dayness that we seem to be living in this present culture. But see the wider picture and remember that we're all agents of hope.
That is wonderful. How do we do that?
Keep a smile on your face. And always find something every day to smile about.
Get together with people you love.
And get together with good friends, and know that you're loved. I think the hardest thing for some folks to accept is the fact that they are loved. And that's the one thing that Jesus really taught us, that there's never a moment of the day that goes by that we're not loved by God or loved by someone else or loved by both. So and keep a good sense of humor.
I had the experience of becoming, I don't know what phrase I want to look. I mean, I got introduced to this comment, which I just want to share, and we may have to end with this. Live each moment of every day as if God couldn't make it and sent you in its place.
Right. Right.
And I think that really calls upon us. What we've been talking about this whole time is just to, what would God do? What would Spirit do? Whatever anybody is listening, whatever name they want to lay on that,
Right.
Great mystery creator. I don't care. It's just, how would I act if I was divine? And you know what? You are divine, and when you start doing it, you'll be demonstrating it. Which is kind of what the 12th step is about. But that's a whole other show for another time.
Yeah.
I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.